be here. It's nice to meet some of you all before we started and see some familiar faces too. So I titled this Unweaving the Adherence Enigma, and kind of a strange title, but the main topic we're going to talk about today is the concept of adherence, and mostly where it comes from the field of health psychology. And when you start to think about adherence or getting someone to stick to behavioral plans that coincide with medical advice, it can be really difficult to get our clients or even ourselves to stick to these behavioral changes. So today we're going to unweave this topic. We're going to look at it. We're going to take it apart. We're going to unravel it. And I called it the adherence enigma because enigma is a person or thing that's mysterious, puzzling, or difficult to understand, right? So we're going to break it down into very simple terms. We're going to look at several different theories that help us understand the concept of adherence and hopefully apply it to a behavior that you're looking to change or become more adherent to. If you have a client or a patient that you maybe struggled with helping them stick to a certain behavior, we're going to be talking about that, and then we're going to apply it to a case that I'll show you and I'll talk about today, Christina's case. So that's what we'll be doing today. I like interactions, so if you all have questions and comments throughout, please do that. And we'll have some participation throughout, some time to kind of work on your little treatment planning sheet that looks like this. It's nice and pretty. It's yellow, it's a happy color. So I'll explain that in a minute. And I'm going to try to see if I can work the technology. I have no disclosures to make, so here's just a slide saying that. Here are our objectives. Kind of talked through some of those already, but we're going to identify clinical applications for the concepts of adherence and habit formation, apply relevant theories, and to understand and apply those theories to a treatment plan. So I hope that this will be useful for you, immediately useful for your practice, or if you're not practicing, for even your personal life as we go through the information. So any good presentation starts with a definition, right? So here's what adherence means. It is the extent to which a person's behavior, in terms of taking medications, following diets, or executing lifestyle changes, coincides with medical or health advice. And you might see in the literature or just in talking with other professionals the term compliance used sometimes to talk about this same concept. But to me, they have a little bit of a different connotation. So whereas adherence presumes kind of that the patient agrees with the recommendations, compliance is more forceful to me, or kind of assumes patient passivity in the issue. And one of the big topics that we'll talk about today is that you're more likely to get your patient or client to adhere if they're involved and they feel like they're a part of that decision-making process. So I like that term better. So we're going to use that today. There are several different ways to measure adherence, and the research today typically uses all three, but there are the subjective measurements. There's things like asking the patient directly, have you been adherent to whatever the behavior is, or asking family members or friends. There are also objective measures. These would be things like counting their medications to make sure to see what they've taken. That would be examining pharmacy records if we're talking about medication compliant. And then there are also biochemical markers, right? So doing like the drug testing to see, okay, has this person actually been compliant? And generally when we're talking about adherence, in the literature, they count at least at 80%. If they're doing the behavior 80% of the time, that's considered adherent. So you don't have to be doing something 100% of the time. It's not perfection. There's room for mistakes and errors and not following through every single time. Now, some issues that might not work. Like if we're talking about a medication that has to be taken every day, or this person is not going to make it, that might be a little bit, you would want a higher adherence rate. So why am I talking about this concept of adherence today? Here are some stats. And this has been an issue for a long time. People have struggled with getting their patients to comply with recommendations for a long, long time. Even Hippocrates, 2,000 years ago, warned the physician about this issue. So in the U.S. today, one of the consequences of this is financial costs. And in the U.S., as you can see, approximately $290 billion, about 13% of healthcare spending, is the cost of non-adherence. And that's mainly from avoidable hospital stays. That's the majority of that, but there are also other issues. If you think about someone not taking medication that they should have been taking, eventually they're going to have increased doctor's appointments. Maybe they're going to have a change in medication that costs more down the road. So there are other costs too. And medication non-adherence varies by disease. Insurance coverage, patient characteristics, with rates of adherence from 25% to 50%. So we're really not that good at adhering to what we're supposed to adhere to. And so it is a problem that's costing us a lot of money. And actually, when it's a complex treatment that requires lifestyle or behavioral modification of existing habits, non-adherence can be as high as 70%. So we want to do something about that, right? All right, the other side of this is over-adherence. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but this is an issue that's out there. Some patients are overly compliant. So if you take this and you apply it to the mental health field that we work in, have you ever stuck with a treatment plan that wasn't working for longer than necessary? You're kind of encouraging that patient to over-adhere, right? Have you ever had an overly compliant patient? Maybe the patient who comes into treatment and completes the entire workbook in the first 2 days. Okay, that's over-adherence. Or have you continued to treat someone who had likely benefited from a referral, and you maybe could have done that a little bit earlier to help that patient? That could be a concept of over-adherence too. So the takeaway from this is that we want to measure our outcomes in our practice, right, to make sure that the changes that we're wanting to implement are actually occurring. And that can give you direct feedback on how you're doing. Okay, so now we get to the fun part. This little sheet here. This is going to be your treatment plan. And really we're going to be looking at 3 different people: yourself, this lady Christina that I'll talk about in just a moment, and then a client that you're working with, or a patient that you're working with, or maybe you can reflect on someone in the past that you've worked with that you want to help become more adherent to some behavior. It doesn't have to be taking medication. It can be really anything. Maybe it's on completing their homework assignments. Maybe it's on meditating daily. Whatever that, healthier eating patterns, exercising regularly. It can be any behavior as long as it's specific and measurable. Okay, so if you want to take a minute and just write down for yourself, maybe one of those New Year's resolutions that you had a few weeks ago that you haven't really stuck to. It could be one of those for yourself. And think about something for one of the clients that you're working on too. And you can write those down where it says goal. So what's the goal? Maybe for you it's, I want to drink 8 ounces of water before my morning coffee. Or go to the gym 3 times a week. Whatever it is. So go ahead and write that down on your treatment plan. What we're going to do is all these other boxes are different theories and topics taken from the literature, and we're going to apply each of those to the behavior that you're looking to change. These are some of the ones we're going to go through. Ooh, okay. So I'm going to introduce you to Christina. Christina is a 22-year-old Caucasian female. She lives in North Mississippi. She's hoping to be cleared by her physician, Dr. Now, for gastric bypass surgery. She's weighs about 600 pounds, and she has to lose weight in order for him to clear her for gastric bypass surgery. And some of the recommendations he has made have been to follow a very specific nutrition plan to increase her movement some. She currently lives at home with her mother, her grandmother, and they basically have to do most things for her. She has a boyfriend who comes and will bring her food from time to time and is kind of in the picture there. The clip we're going to watch, you will see him as well. But we're going to watch a clip from a follow-up appointment with her physician, Dr. Now, to see how she's progressing in that weight loss for pre-surgery. So this is actually from a TLC series. I don't know if it still airs, but it's called My 600-Pound Life. So we're just going to use her as an example. Let's see if I can click here. Hopefully it will work.
Do we have any music? Somebody cue the music.
I'm sorry, we have to watch an ad.
I cannot believe it. My God, my shop.
Come and get us.
Hi, Mike Will. Hello, volunteers. You've been doing way too much good in the community, and something had to be done. And there's some people here who want to say, thanks.
Isn't that nice? Okay.
It's been about a month since we've seen Dr. Mazar. I hope that been better since the last time we've seen him.
I think you have. You've cut back a lot.
And I haven't really had much of an appetite. I just haven't been that hungry. Fast food is what we've been eating mostly. But not like I used to. I mean, it hasn't been 2 hamburgers or anything like that. It's just been more.
I'm really nervous. If Dr. Now doesn't see a lot of weight loss, he might not give me the surgery.
Okay, good.
So instead of hoping that you lost 30 pounds, you gained 17 pounds. What happened there?
I think it's mainly fluid because I did good once I got back.
It's not water. For that, you have to drink at least 300 gallons of water. You gain weight because you feel comfortable when you're eating.
We haven't been able to cook proper foods.
You know, that's very typical. When you got an enabler here, when you ask a question, the enabler would answer. So why don't you let her answer? Okay. This is very, very disturbing behavior. This is a sign of very dysfunctional family dynamic. What did they give you from fast food? A typical day. Don't look at him. Just look at me.
A hamburger and a couple fries. I didn't finish the fries. I had like 3 slices of pizza the night that we got in.
Pizza is not part of your diet when you're 700 pounds. Now, granted, they hand you all those food, but you're gonna have to say no.
You're right, you're absolutely right. We're the ones,
So how am I gonna get her away from you?
Well,
Christina must be consuming 7,000 calories a day in order to gain 17 pounds. But because she's accustomed to eating a lot, they don't realize that she's still overeating. In your home environment, nothing has worked. We need to separate Christina from her enabler, so we're going to put her in the hospital, give her a chance.
Okay, so we'll reflect on Christina's case throughout as we talk about these different topics. So just kind of let that settle and think about that case a little bit. How long do y'all think it takes to form a new habit? 28 days? Forever? 2 weeks? Really good. 2 weeks? 8 weeks? Okay, so old research, 21 days. This Mounts, Maxwell Mounts, he was a plastic surgeon in the 1950s, and he kind of got this thought started. He was noticing a strange pattern among his patients. For example, when someone would have a plastic surgery, like a nose job, for example, it would take them about 3 weeks, 21 days to become accustomed to the way that their new face looks. So if you think about, have you ever gotten kind of an extreme haircut and it, like, you don't really recognize yourself at first and it takes a while to get used to that, that kind of makes sense. But he actually wrote about this in the book Psycho-Cybernetics, and he was saying that it requires a minimum of 21 days for an old mental image to dissolve and for a new one to gel. But what happened is that information kind of just by word of mouth got spread that, okay, well, it's 3 weeks and you can form a new habit, but we know a little bit more about this now. There's a range, and it depends on habit, it depends on the person, the type of habit you're trying to start. But from 18 to 254 days, so that's 2 to 8 months to build a new behavior. So that takes a lot of consistency over a long time. And like I said before, you don't have to be perfect with it for the habit to form. You can have some lapses in that and still develop a new habit. And so this study came from the habits of 96 people over 12 weeks. Each participant chose a habit that they wanted to change. Some people it was running for 10 minutes before dinner. Some people it was drinking 8 ounces of water 4 times a day, whatever it was. And each day they just rate on how automatic that behavior felt. And then they measured how long it took for it to become automatic. And like I said, it's not all or nothing. So that's the good news. We don't have to be perfect. Okay, the habit loop. I recently read this book, The Power of Habit. Has anyone read that? Okay, we're going to watch a little clip on it because it was fascinating. And I think anyone even not in our field would enjoy this book. And I have the reference to it, I think, in the next slide. But basically, a habit is composed, and he talks a lot about this in the book. There's a cue, then you engage in the routine, which is the behavior, and there's a reward. So if you're trying to change a habit that you already have, it takes some work. You got to really figure out, okay, what's the cue? Maybe it's a certain time of day. I do this behavior, at this time of day, or it's around a certain person. We think about Christina. I think when she was around her mother or her boyfriend, she was more likely to eat those foods that they brought to her. And then you got to think about what the reward is. One thing that I left out of Christina's case was she had talked about using food to cope with feeling really afraid growing up for her mother and father's fighting. Her parents are now divorced. But that's kind of how that habit developed for her. She was afraid or felt scared. She'd go into a routine, and then there was some reward. That's at least maybe one part of her story. So let's see if this will work if I click this. And he's better at explaining all this. This is the book. Let's see if we can make it big. There we go. Charles Duhigg.
Imagine for a moment that you have a habit that you really want to change. Let's say, for instance, you go up to the cafeteria every afternoon and you talk to people. This habit has caused you to gain a little bit of weight. In fact, this habit has caused you to gain exactly 8 pounds, and your wife has started making some comments. And when I say you, what I really mean is me. Because this is a habit that I have that I just couldn't make. To understand why that habit is so powerful, and what it would take to change it, I had to learn how habits work. Every habit functions the same way. At first, there's a key, some kind of trigger that makes the behavior unfold automatically. Studies tell us that it could be the location, time of day, a certain emotional state, other people, or just a pattern of behavior that consistently triggers a certain routine. To figure out the key for my training, I spent a few days tracking exactly when the urge came up. And what I noticed pretty soon was something interesting. The cookie craving always hit about between 3 o'clock and 3:30 in the afternoon. That was my cue. It was a certain time of day. The next part of the habit is the routine, the behavior itself. And for me, that was pretty easy to figure out. Every day between 3 and 3:30, get this craving for the I get up out of my chair, I walk over to the elevator, I take the elevator up to the 14th floor, I get out, I buy a cookie, and then I would eat it while talking to my colleagues in the cafeteria. The last part of the habit loop is the reward. And in some respects, the reward is the most important part, because that's why habits exist, so that we can get the rewards that we want. But figuring out a reward is kind of tricky. To figure out what reward was driving my habit, I did a little bit of an experiment. One day when the cookie urge struck, instead of going up to the cafeteria, I went outside and I took a walk around the block. Then the next day, I went up to the cafeteria, but instead of finding a cookie, I got a candy bar and then ate it at my desk. And then the day after that, I went up to the cafeteria again, but I didn't buy anything. Instead, I just talked to friends for about 10 minutes. You get the idea. What I was trying to do was test different hypotheses to figure out what reward I was actually craving. And what I figured out pretty quickly was it had nothing to do with cookies. It had to do with socializing. Nowadays what happens is at about 3:30 in the afternoon, I absentmindedly stand up, I look around the office, I see a friend, I'll walk over and we'll gossip for 10 minutes and then I'll go back to my desk. The urge to go get cookies completely disappeared. The new behavior has become a habit. And I've lost about 12 pounds. Studies have shown that if you can diagnose your habits, you can change them in whichever way you want. So what are the cues, routines, and rewards in your life? What habit do you want to change? The power of habit. Why we do what we do in life and business. Learn more at thepowerofhabit.com.
So what do you guys think? How do you, I mean, we're talking about habits because if you can make a behavior a habit, you're more likely to become more adherent to it, right? So with your own behavior, maybe it's not a current habit that you have, maybe it's something that you need to implement. So one thing to think about is how are you going to cue that behavior to happen and what reward is going to follow that behavior from happening if you're trying to build a new habit. If it's a habit you're trying to break, it's the opposite. It's going through that experiment like he talked about in this presentation. So just thinking about first your own behavior that you identified today for this talk. What are some cues that you can put in place, or what would make sense with the behavior that you are trying to become more adherent to? Or if you want to talk about your client, if there's a client that you can think of that there's a behavior that you want to help them with. Or Christina, there's 3 options. Yeah.
I'm not really sure, because one thing I've been working on for a while is to get 8 hours of sleep a night. And my habit is that, I've tried to put in like a little reminder alarm, like time to go to bed or whatever, but then I always end up wanting to read and like do other stuff. So it seems like I want to do fun stuff before I go to sleep, and so I never meet the goal, and then I'm exhausted. So anyway, that's kind of like where I am with that right now. It's been really frustrating to change that. So I don't know, like I've tried the cue of like it's whatever time. That doesn't seem to be something in the back of my mind that's like, get away with it.
Well, it seems like there's kind of a need in the habit that you already have. It's like there's this need to do something fun or relaxing before you go to bed, something that you enjoy, right? And so, like he was talking about with the cookie thing, you know, he didn't have to have that cookie. It was more about the getting up and interacting with people. So if there's a way to meet that need a little bit earlier before your bedtime, I think that that takes some thought to it. Does anyone have any ideas that could help her out?
I mean, you could even just cue your alarm just however long you want to read, like 20 minutes before. So like, okay, sit down, like read or watch, and then go to bed. Like, 20 minutes before you would actually want to go to bed, or however long you designate.
Yeah, I think I would have to back it up, because I have an alarm now that's like it's a reminder to go to bed in 20 minutes.
20 more minutes.
I'm not on the right schedule.
What about a reminder to do the fun thing?
Yeah, what about taking a break like in the morning and giving yourself permission to read 15 minutes of fun, as opposed to trying to get yourself. Yeah.
I know I think it's really been a challenge because I'm not a morning person, probably because I'm working my plate. But I think a lot of it too is that I'm working. Like I go home and I keep working and I'm trying to eat dinner and then I work all the way till I can work no more and then I'm like, I gotta go to bed. And once in bed I'm like, oh, I really want to read. I never got to read today.
That is going to tie into willpower that we talked about, because when you're working, you're using up a lot of that willpower, and then you need that reward later on to kind of let off steam. It sounds like, but I was thinking maybe even like, it seems like the alarm when that goes off for you, it's kind of a negative thing. It means I only have this much time until I have to go to bed. And I really want to do all these other things, but. I agree with Erica, like maybe backing up the alarm, but it being an alarm for you to go and take a break and do your fun thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe even in the midst of doing your work, like, okay, we're gonna take half an hour now instead of working, I'm gonna do my fun thing, I'm gonna go read right now. And then, you know, if I feel like going back to the work, I will, otherwise I'll catch up on it tomorrow.
I was gonna say, like, make the alarm have a positive connotation, and the alarm is now when you stop working. So that you're setting that boundary on, this is where now I get to have my personal time and the stuff that I enjoy. So instead of the alarm being that negative, making it positive, like this is my time now.
My goal is to actually read at least one book a month. Like that's like my New Year's resolution. So, but I run into the same problem. Obviously, Chris and I do the same thing here, so that's probably why we struggle with some of the same things. But like I get to a point where I'm just so tired that I'm like, I can't even imagine opening up a book right now.
Yeah.
So it's like I should do something like that too. Like set like a boundary basically for myself that like just spend 20 minutes and I'd probably be a lot happier. Like that I'm following through with something instead of like. So like for example, like the first of January I read 2 books and I was like, yes, I'm doing great. I haven't read a single book yet in February, and I'm like, now I have to read a book within a couple days. You know, and it's just my procrastination tendencies too to do that. But
it's that boundary, like you said, to make it instead of
Better get a small book.
luckily I have some time this weekend. So
that negative positive thing I think is that.
I think I'm glad you all bring up these personal examples, and that's why I asked you all to think of one, is because I think it's so important when we're trying to help other people change our behaviors to be able to relate and say, okay, this is pretty difficult and it takes some thought and some planning and trying out different ideas. I mean, you're running into some barriers with, you know, the resolutions and trying to change that habit. So it gives us some compassion. It also helps us to be able to maybe think through with our clients the cue, routine, reward, and kind of how they might be feeling about changing habits. Aww. So these are there for a reason. You'll see a couple more of these throughout the presentation. But there was an article that I read. Go back. You want to see the puppies? That said that they did an experiment and they found that when students were exposed to an image of puppies or kittens, kind of young, it it helped them concentrate more on the content and to be able to focus. So I'm hoping like this will be your cue to help you focus more. But they thought it was because it brings out more careful tendencies in us. Like we're like, you're careful around little puppies and attentive to their needs and things like that. So, and I just love little puppies. I don't want one, but I love them. We got 2 puppies last year and that didn't go so well, but they're growing out of it. Okay, so this is the next model that we'll talk about and apply to the concept of adherence. It's just a behavioral model, so you all are familiar with this, but I think there are some things that we can really take from this to help us with our own behaviors, to help our clients, and to think about Christina's case too. There we go. So, Buris Frederick Skinner, B.F. Skinner, came up with a little Skinner box. You all are familiar with that? Okay, good. So basically we'll be talking today about reinforcement, how that moves a person towards their goal behavior. We don't use punishment as much in the concept of adherence because it doesn't work much. It doesn't do much to get people to stick with the behavior long term. So it's not helpful. We're not gonna use it, right? So both positive and negative reinforcement, as you know, strengthen a behavior or increase the likelihood of a behavior occurring. And like I said, the effects of punishment are limited and sometimes very difficult to predict. At best, it inhibits or suppresses a behavior, and it can bring up really strong negative feelings and emotions towards the person, the environment, wherever it's carried out. So it's really seldom useful. This model does predict that adherence will be difficult because, as we just talked about, learned habits are resistant to change. You all know from personal experience too that's true. And there are a few different interventions that we can use. I'm going to talk a little bit about each. We spoke a little bit about cues a minute ago, but more specifically, this can be things like if you ever got a phone call from a doctor's office reminding you about an appointment, that's a cue that's shown to increase your likelihood of actually showing up for the appointment. If you've ever left like a Post-it note or set an alarm, that's a cue for you to engage in the behavior. Sometimes there are just natural cues that we didn't plan or we didn't put in, but if we're thinking about starting a new behavior, it is important to think about a cue that can help us jog our memory to think about that. So what cues can you all think of for maybe to help Christina in her eating, or what cues are already present that she needs to kind of get rid of, or for yourself or for a client that you're working with? And if you want to tailor your treatment plan, this is under, where is it? Behavioral strategies, cues, and prompts. You can write some notes down. Any thoughts about cues? Yeah?
Well, for Christina, I mean, you kind of already mentioned it, but the cue is being around her family. And that was obviously discussing things, so they kind of did that already, but like removing her from the family or figuring out a different, she'll have to figure out a different way. Eating by herself or with other people, that would maybe cue that.
I was thinking another one was, instead of setting your timer for bed and all that, is to set your timer to end work. Like, because that is a positive, like, yay, I'm done, I can sit off and do something fun. So set your timer, even if you need to work into the evening, maybe not work for 3 hours, work for 2 instead, and give yourself some self-time.
It's celebratory.
Yes, and then when your timer goes off, you're like, hallelujah, instead of like, oh man, I'm running out of time.
Yes.
I've worked with little children, so pictures of something that you can get, that you can have, about the work thing, stopping working and leaving work at work, and not taking it home, because I'll sit there for hours. When I did that, I just retired. But and know that when I get home, I can do family things, I can do the good things that I need to do, and I'm less stressed about all this work. I would get cues from phones. Are you still at school? So that was a big cue. Thank you very much. That's it, thanks.
Okay. Prompts is also listed here, and I had the hardest time remembering what the difference between a cue and a prompt was, just because I don't really work in the behavior modification area where you would be using that day in, day out. But the best example I could find of this that made sense for me, of course I have little kids, is a coach who helps a small child who's learning how to play baseball to kind of hold the bat, teach the proper swing, is using prompting. So really helping the patient or the client to enact the behavior. The formal definition is antecedent that induces a person to perform a behavior that otherwise does not occur. So it's helping a behavior to occur. So anyone have any thoughts about prompts?
Showing the right way to do something.
Yeah, so maybe sitting with a client or a patient and showing them exactly what you mean by the behavior that you're talking about, or if you're doing like a CBT worksheet or something, kind of filling one out together. Exactly. And then the next thing is tailoring the regimen. So you want to remember to really fit the treatment habits and routines into a patient's daily life. And simplify it. Not everyone's life is the same. They're going to have different routines, different things that they're used to doing. So you're going to tailor whatever the intervention is for them, to fit for them. Not how you would do it, but what makes sense for them. You can also tailor to the stage of change that they are in, or that you are in for your behavior, right? Or that Christina is in. And we'll talk about some of the interventions and how those change and a little bit on motivational interviewing later, go into more specifics on that. And then you can also tailor by helping clients resolve problems that prevent them from changing their behavior, so using some of that motivational interviewing. We also have graduated regimen implementation. That just means don't throw it all at them at once. Now with some behaviors that is necessary. When you're talking about taking a medication, well, you can't just take a fourth of it to start off unless the physician has prescribed it that way. But for other behaviors that can make sense. So if you're trying to exercise more, maybe starting out with 15 minutes every other day and then gradually building up. And then rewards. So rewards, we talked a bit about as we were talking about habits, but there are both intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. What do we know about those two? What's more effective? Intrinsic. Yeah. The extrinsic can kind of get us through and get the behavior started and kind of help us in the short term. But really if there's an intrinsic reward, so a sense of accomplishment, a sense of pride, that's going to help us to stick, feeling healthier. It's going to help us to stick to the behavior longer, being able to do more things. And then contracts. Contracts are sometimes also used. They can help at times. These can be verbal or written. And they're best when they're agreed upon at the beginning of a treatment and that the patient is really involved. It's not just a contract, like you hear you have to follow this, but they're involved in developing that. What I automatically think about, because I've worked a lot with professionals who go through treatment, is monitoring contracts and how successful physicians and lawyers and other professionals can be post-substance treatment in maintaining their recovery. They can have like an 80 to 90% success rate compared to a much lower rate of success for people who do not have that type of contract in place. And again, they have, usually it's tied to their license, so they have something big to lose if they do relapse. There's an example from participants in a VA substance use treatment program. They were also more likely to complete aftercare and be abstinent from drugs 1 year later when their program included the contract, included attendance prompts, and reinforcers. So a lot of these behavioral strategies gave them better outcomes. So we know that using these things can help. Any other thoughts on how you can apply any of these that we've talked about or in the behavioral model to your own behavior. Christina, what can we do to help her out, or a client that you're working with? We'll make notes. I want it to be helpful. You guys doing okay? Should we take a break halfway? Maybe, we'll see. Okay, there we go. All right, so on to the next one. This is the self-efficacy theory. See where I put this on your worksheet. It's right underneath your goal. You can make some notes there if you like under self-efficacy. But this basically comes from the social cognitive theory, where Bandura says that humans have some capacity to exercise limited control over their lives. That is, we use our cognitive processes for self-regulation. So self-efficacy, anyone want to read that for me, what self-efficacy means?
People's belief in their capacity to exercise some measure of control over their own functioning and over their environmental events.
Okay, so it's basically your belief in your ability to carry out a behavior, to do something, your belief in your own capacity. How do you think someone can acquire or enhance their self-efficacy?
It can be reading a book, acquiring new information, watching videos, anything that would, give you a new perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're gaining that information, you're kind of teaching yourself, okay, how am I going to do this or increase? Sure. Any other ways you all can think about to increase self-efficacy?
Following through with what you say you're gonna do.
Yeah, so performing the behavior. So if you see yourself do the behavior you're trying to work on, you're going to believe that you can do it. And the more and more that you do it, the more self-efficacy you're going to have. Also, vicarious experience. So if you see another person who you kind of judge is on the same level as you see them doing it, that can increase your own self-efficacy. Hey, if they can do it, I can do it too, type of thing. Verbal persuasion, or listening to the trusted words of a family member or friend or someone that you care about, that can help. And then sometimes different physiological arousal states can give you that motivation, or that increase that self-efficacy, or sometimes decrease it. Sometimes with anxiety can make you feel less self-efficacious. Okay, so what could you do for your client or yourself, your own behavior, or for Christina with this self-efficacy theory? What do you think you could implement to help her increase her self-efficacy? Because right now, the clip that we watched with Christina, she said, I think I've done better, and then you could see her pretty emotional in the video when she hadn't lost the weight that she thought she would have. She may be thinking at this point, like, I don't know if I can do this. I have a lot of weight to lose in order to get this surgery. What could we do or put in place to help her increase her belief in it?
Finding just a safe place where the enablers won't be there, where she doesn't have to worry about, they're going to bombard me with things that aren't good for me and my weight and all that. It's something that to produce some positive feelings or thoughts about. I can't do it if they're here, and I don't want to hurt their feelings, so I'm going to eat food. But if they're not there, and like they said, taking her to the hospital, but to give her something that she knows she can do this with support, and not that enabling support, but another kind of support that would be positive.
So changing the environment so that she can see that she can actually do it. Yeah.
The group weigh-in was a total negative.
Yeah.
I mean, you got the whole family there, and you get up on the scale, and 17 pounds. So her and a doctor probably, or her and a technician probably could have been a little less traumatic for the whole situation.
That may have helped her.
Yeah.
What about if she and her supports worked on a food journal together? Because you know, right now is the way it stands. Her supports are who's going to be bringing her food because she can't feed herself currently. And if they worked on it together so that they could support each other in saying, you know what, let's work on this together to see what we're really eating and how we can make improvements.
Absolutely. Get them involved in a positive way.
Now, would rewards not come into play at this point in time, you know, for minor, successes?
Sure, yeah, and you could definitely combine and bring in stuff from the behavioral model and implement rewards for those successes to help her be more successful, yeah.
I was gonna say too, like, she doesn't seem to have a way to really measure it herself. You know, she's kind of saying like, I think I did better, but she doesn't really have a tool to figure that out ahead of time. Seems like she's kind of stuck.
Right. She has no real way to measure her progress to know if she's doing things right or wrong. She just said, I thought I was doing better. You know, I haven't been eating like I used to.
They were saying, and the boyfriend said, oh yeah, they're gonna know you're doing better or something. And said, okay, so I'm getting it from him. You know, that would mean that, oh, you're better. Okay?
Yeah.
And not really knowing if I truly believe that myself, somebody has to tell me. So I need to find a way where I can actually feel that then.
So how do you install the intrinsic motivation for her? Because it's all external. I mean, when she broke down, everybody was hovering around her, petting her and doing her hair, and it's like that was just all it was all external. It was just, how do you get to the internal with her? Because I'm not sure she even knows what that is.
Yeah, so the question's about internal motivation and how to get there. With her, she had an initial or some motivation that is there underlying it. She's the one that's pursuing this surgery in the first place. She does have that goal that's there. It's just where she is in terms of her stage of change and kind of maybe having some of these failures that are getting her discouraged and saying, maybe I can't do this. But
she's
when
getting a lot of reward for her negative.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, why Dr. Now said,
so.
we need to get you away from these enablers, right, so that we can get back to you working towards your goal. But, I think when we talk about motivational interviewing, if she were able to work with someone on getting back to what her goal is, what are her reasons for doing, making this change, if she was able to focus in on her without all this external noise, I think that she would be able to kind of get back to that. Now, she wasn't, that I know of at this point, working at a therapist. We'll see her follow up later where she is.
I have a wonder if the doctor is telling you have to lose X amount of pounds before we can do the surgery, that she wouldn't be supplied some kind of a guideline as to food, not just, okay, go home and let's see what you can do, and okay, you can't do it, so we're going to throw you in the hospital. It's kind of reinforcing that negative self-feeling.
Right, so she needs something specific to follow.
There's not enough information there. I mean, but I find it hard to believe that they wouldn't supply her with some means to lose weight, because obviously she's not good at it because she's gained so much.
Yes, and they did develop a specific nutritional plan for her that she's supposed to follow. They didn't really hit on it in that video, but.
Well, he kind of mentioned pizza isn't on your plan. So I mean, which kind of apply. I mean, I think that's probably obvious, but also it's probably. I'm sure she was probably given.
It's not always obvious. It's tomatoes and cheese.
Yeah.
Well, and he's probably, he's trying to think, why is she not compliant with this? Well, I see the enablers, but there's also probably some responsibility on his end. Maybe he didn't explain the nutrition plan. Maybe it was just a sheet of paper, this is what you need to follow. And so I think as providers, we really need to think about what's our role without taking on responsibility for the patient's behaviors. They're solely in charge of what they choose to do, but we can really influence that. We can make a difference.
We use the term enablers, and that I have the same with negative connotations. That has such a negative connotation because you look at these people and they just absolutely, you can see the love and caring. It's working with the family or the supports, or especially your mother, to say, how can you nurture and love this person in a way that doesn't involve food? You know, and that's, you know, if you bring out that highlight to say, look at, you know, we can see how much you care for her. Let's just help you find a different way to care for her.
Right.
So.
Right, yes, because they're not doing this because they're out to get her
No.
or wanting to harm her, right? And that's what we usually see when we're using that term is these people don't have poor intentions. It's, they don't have a better plan of action to go about doing things. And so it can be our job to help them define that. Yeah.
But there's always a secondary benefit too. If she's gets her mom, her satisfaction out of caring for this girl, if this girl loses weight and she's not gonna have, I mean, I'm projecting that, but it's a possibility.
And we'll see in the follow-up some of the issues that Christina does. She eventually, spoiler alert, does get lose the weight, gets the weight loss surgery. But then there are issues afterwards too, because you can see some of the unhealthy dynamics that are already present. If she's not already working on herself and some of the things that she's struggled with in her life and taking care of, just losing the weight isn't going to solve all of that. So she continues to struggle.
She has an interesting point there that a lot of mothers seem to show love with food, but and in this particular case, it would be almost impossible to hug this lady because, and it seemed like the only way that mom can show the affection is,
Maybe in her mind, this is the way that she's showing love. But, you know, I think as professionals, we can definitely help her find other ways other than, you know, physical affection or giving her food to be able to express how she feels and to give her support. So it's unfortunate. Yes?
Well, I think like in terms of working with Christina, like to improve self-efficacy, like helping her to like advocate for herself and to like make better decisions might empower her more. You know, I mean, she probably has a pretty low self-worth. I mean, feeling the way she does and obviously getting the news that she didn't lose any weight. So like really empowering her to like make the decisions and like following through with those, like I think that would help her in terms of improving like her self-efficacy work.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And empower her to be able to make those decisions and feel like she can do it.
Yeah, like she doesn't be so passive and, you know, like, I mean, obviously she does rely on these people for a lot of things, but making sure that she's like the one kind of in control a little bit more.
Giving her her voice back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Use that term. Yeah. Okay, so a combination of self-efficacy and your outcome expectation. So what do you think that this treatment or this behavior change is going to do for you? Combination of those two things plays an important role in predicting behavior, so whether or not she actually follows through. So does Christina, one, believe that the diet's going to work, and does she believe in her ability to follow this diet? That predicts whether or not she engages in the behavior according to this theory of coverage. Yeah.
In the beginning there, for changing the behavior, whatever it is, not eating, you have to have a radical change. You have to know what the problem is. I mean, there has to be I don't want to use the word shock value, but there has to be an intense buy-in to the thing, no matter if it's not reading a book at 10 o'clock at night or turning on a TV show. You have to buy into it in the beginning for its success in the end. And I don't know where that line is in the beginning. Just telling somebody you need to lose, in her case, 100 pounds or 200 pounds or whatever the goal is, you still have to buy into that system or process in order to make that happen. If I'm sitting there just going, oh yeah, I can do this, I haven't made a commitment to doing anything.
So it all starts with a commitment. There has to be that buy-in in the first place before you're actually going to do it. I mean, you can have all the information in the world about what you need to do, but if you're not in agreement with that, then you're not going to follow it.
And that, yes, but it has to be, it's just not an agreement. We have to have a deep want, or I don't know what the word would be, to do that, because any behavior change we participate in, except the buy-in, is got to be pretty intense. It's not like I'm going to do this for a couple of days and, you know, it'll all be better next week, Tuesday or something. So.
Let me ask you this. Can you start with you work with someone who is not at that point of intense buy-in, where they are, they still have this goal, but they're not 100% bought in. Can you help them progress to making that behavior change?
You can lead it, but the expectation at the end is limited.
And I think that's where the motivational interviewing can really come in, is just to meet that patient where they are. And it may not be that they engage in that behavior right away, but they're coming to you, they're coming up with their own ideas of why they maybe need to make this change, and maybe eventually they do get to that point. Yeah, so I think there's kind of a middle ground with that too, that not everybody has that like intense buy-in. There's this big meaning for them behind it, but some of them eventually will get there. So, and we'll talk about this in a moment in the motivational interviewing, but one of the things that I have struggled with personally as a clinician in the past is saying, oh, well, they weren't ready. They left treatment or they left therapy because they just weren't ready for that change. But did I really work with them and meet them where they were in a non-judgmental way? Was I trying to argue my case because I see that they need this change so much, or was I really there for them in that way? So we can't take it all on ourselves, like I said before, that it's not our responsibility what decisions they make, but I do think that we can help them to get to where they want to go, or towards those healthier goals, those things that are going to be in the benefit of them in the long term, if they eventually want to.
I think the buy-in has to do with how complicated the task is, that they are wanting to do. And if it's made to, it's a big task and they're looking at the entire picture, the full picture or the full case, without looking at, parts of it, I think it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah. So the complexity of whatever the behavior is, that if it's too many processes or too many things that they have to change at once, that can be very overwhelming. Making it into a more simple or step-by-step tasks can maybe be a little bit easier. But yeah, I think both of those can affect the buy-in. You're right. Who'd like to participate in a demonstration? I need 2 people. And here are the requirements. You have to be okay with someone touching your arm and like not having an injury in your arms. That's all. 2 people. All right, thanks. Okay, come on up. So we're talking about self-efficacy. What we're going to do, what's your name?
Tanisha.
Tanisha, okay, and Erica. So Tanisha, we are going to have you hold out your arm. Okay, and Erica, you might want to come over on this side. Tanisha, I want you to say, I will try to resist.
Okay. I will try to resist.
Now go ahead and push down on your arm.
I will try to resist. I will try to resist.
Okay. Now I want you to hold out your arm and I want you to say, I will resist.
I will resist.
Okay, go ahead. Push down on your arm now.
I will resist. I will resist.
Okay. Good.
I was trying, I was pushing really hard.
So what did, I'm going over here to the camera. What did you all notice during that process, Tanisha, as you were doing that? Did you notice any difference between the 2?
I think it had more to do with my focus on what the action that I was doing, and the determination came from saying, the words too, and being focused at the same time. It was almost like I was training myself to stay focused by saying it at the same time.
So it's that affirmation. Did you notice any difference between, with this arm you said, I will try to resist, and this arm you said, I will resist. Was there any difference there for you? Did you notice any difference?
A little bit. I mean, I think on that one you were more stronger, on it. And I don't know if that's me thinking that you are or whether you were or not, but I think when you put the word try in front of it, it implies that maybe I can do it, maybe I can, but if I'm saying I will, then it's I'm going to do this. you know, so.
So even that slight change of words, even though you didn't notice it, typically what I see when I do that is people are stronger when they say, I will resist, as opposed to, I will try to resist.
I've heard in your voice too, when it's different in your voice.
Sounded stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you guys. So that's, I like that demonstration. I think it ties into self-efficacy and her belief that she's going to resist this pressure, right? And that we saw her a little bit stronger the second time. Sometimes it works in the opposite direction where the person pushing decides to get stronger because they hear that challenge. So it doesn't always work out that way. Yeah. Okay.
I wondered with this lady, it seemed like it'd be really challenging to find rewards. It sounded like she can get up and go do things on her own, or, you know, it's like she's imprisoned herself in her own body.
And that's kind of how she feels, is imprisoned in her own body. But what, we're talking about rewards, like what rewards could you think of for Christina that she might have? Because it may be more challenging based on some of, you know, her inability to get up and to do certain things to have rewards. But can you all think about rewards that she could implement?
Well, one of the rewards that I think, that they didn't really, would be to give her a lot of encouragement for the fact that she showed up for the appointment. You know, I mean, and, you know, that she was trying and that she thought she was doing better, and, you know, a lot of encouragement for the fact that she's taking these really big steps in her life, and, you know, looking at, you know, kind of like what someone else said, you know, looking at the small steps that she's making to move forward, instead of looking at the fact that she isn't doing the big one. Let's look at the fact that let's build on what she's doing that's working for her.
Yes.
Yeah.
So celebrating those steps and really encouraging her could be a reward for her.
Yeah.
I also think about really anything that she enjoys. Maybe it's listening to certain music, or you know, being outside, or whatever it is that isn't food, because that's what we're trying to get away from, right?
I was thinking, what are activities that she and her family or her boyfriend can do that don't involve food?
Playing a game. You know, there are options there, but things that, you know, she already enjoys doing. And that would just be basically having that conversation with her to try to figure out, come up with a list. Much like you've probably done with clients. I'm like, let's come up with as many coping skills as we can. You can find them. There may not be the traditional ones that you automatically think of, but there are rewards there. I'm not going to go into this because of time, but there are some ways that you can measure self-efficacy. Here are some scales. The generalized self-efficacy scale is one measurement. You have that information. And then here are more specific instruments. So depending on the type of behavior that you're looking to help your patient, yourself, or your client increase their self-efficacy around, there are all these different scales, which I thought was neat. I haven't used any of them, so, but I do, if you're interested more in the validity and reliability and things like that, I can get back to you. Another puppy. I noticed that I had a bias towards golden retrievers. So I was going through and like, there's going to be some other pups in here too. Okay. Next is the theories of reasoned action and planned behavior. These are basically two different theories that add on to one another. And what they talk about is that behavioral intentions are the immediate determinant of behavior. So if you intend to do something, then you're more likely to follow through on it. And intentions are a function of three things. One, your attitude towards the behavior, subjective norms, and your motivation to comply with those norms. So that would be basically how loved ones or people around you, people that you interact with, what they think about the behavior. And do you want to be in an agreement with that, an alliance with that? And then perception of control over the behavior. This is my favorite part. This is something that I think is so important. where are you in terms of locus of control? Do you feel like things are all outside of your control? Are you a victim to circumstances, or do you see where you have some control and can make some change? If you're a victim to your circumstances, you don't have any control over this behavior, you're not really likely to change it or do anything about it. And so both of these are used to predict adherence. And there's, on the next, that was just the reference. This is a map of what I just talked about. These three things contribute to or make up intentions, and your intentions predict behavior. Okay, so what are some interventions we could use around attitudes? How do you shift attitudes towards behavior? Yeah.
Also, I actually had an example from a patient that I met with this week, working on self-worth. I asked him just to write like 3 affirmations in the morning and 3 like gratitudes at night. And he's like, "It's so corny." And I was like, well, maybe it is, but I was like, but if you think it, then you're probably not going to do it. You know, so like we just talked about, like, he's like, I know, like, people say that this stuff works. So I was like, yeah, I was like, it's not going to work, like, tomorrow. But I was like, if you do it long enough, like, it might, you know what I mean? It's worth a shot. Like, you're not trying anything different right now, so, like, why not? You know, and then since then, he's told me that he's done it every day, which is really cool. And I think, I mean, it just, obviously, like, just the rapport we have, you know, that probably helps too. But I mean, challenging like his negative thought, and he has like a negative mental filter anyway. So like, kind of every suggestion I give him, he's like, "Oh, that's not gonna work for me," or you know, I'm always like, "Yeah, you're right. I'll do this, but person," you know, an and but person. And he's like, and he acknowledges it. He's like, "I know." He's like, I can't get myself to like think a different way." I was like, "You can." I was like, you have to actually like do these things, and you know, one of his things is just following through. So it just kind of just helping whoever it is, you know, kind of just challenge that like that automatic like negative response to it.
And as this person is doing it, their attitude is probably changing towards what was it again? The
affirmations.
The affirmations.
Yeah. Well, and even the next day, he like in a group was holding himself accountable to do it. You know what I mean? So like obviously he put some like thought into doing it, but and that came from him, not from me, which is really good. But I think just pointing out that he always has like this negative response to pretty much any suggestion. It's like, well, what you're doing before wasn't really working, so why not try something different?
Yeah, that's a great example. So the example was on a patient feeling like affirmations were corny, and so and talking through that, and now who is using these affirmations every day. And you know, oftentimes we find that attitude follows behavior. So if you can get someone to start to do it, then their behavior or their attitude may follow it. But if you're going into a new behavior with poor attitude about it, you're less likely to do it, right? What about the subjective norms? How can we help our patients, or Christina, or for your own case, improve in this area? So this was what other people around us in our circle kind of think about the behavior. Support groups, setting boundaries with family members, or talking about why a behavior is important to you and seeing if they will come on board. Maybe bringing them into a family therapy session would be one way. Developing new friends who are in have the same types of goals that you do. Right, so those are ways. And what about perceived behavioral control? What are some interventions we can use to help ourselves or our client or Christina feel like they have more control over their behavior? Get them out of that victim state. Yes.
Because sometimes I've noticed patients, if you just do the reflection of like past successes, even if there's minor, that tends to give them a little more like, oh, yes.
I have done that.
Well, that's why I thought like the journal would work, a food journal, because even though she can't physically go fix the food, her writing it down saying, you know what, this is what I'm going to have to show the doctor, I can't write that down, gives her a little bit of control within that environment, that knowing that she's got to put it in a log.
Absolutely.
Gives her that kind of power back.
Right. That's great. And it can even just be problem solving with our clients too around this. Well, what ways do you have control of this? What ways, can you make these modifications? Because some people have that really black or white thinking, like, I can't do this. This is outside of my control. There are too many factors going on that make me unable to do this. But then you really start talking about it and you see, okay, there is some action that I can take. There. Okay, I like labs too.
I was looking through something I was looking through something this morning and it said, ways to tolerate your job. And there's a lady pulling a drawer open and there's a little puppy sitting. I'm like, oh, that's so cute, I had to do it again. It was so cute. It made you smile, Things like that make you smile, which is positive, so you're on a different plane.
I have friends in Denver and they allow them to bring their dog to work.
A lot of the news techs and startups, which my kids work for, they all bring their animals to work.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Make a happy day.
Yeah.
Who isn't happy?
I think it's pretty cool. Okay, you all know this one? Stages of change?
Yeah.
Okay, we won't go into too many details about this, but it really applies to this topic of adherence. The basic assumption is that people progress and regress through these 5 spiraling stages, and then relapse is down here too, because that oftentimes happens too. It's not a failure; it just may propel you back to one of the earlier stages and go through again. But really assessing and knowing what your stage of change is, what your client's stage of change is, Christina, where she was with that, can help in selecting the correct interventions to kind of help move forward. So what, you all probably can't read this. On your handout, is this one like very small? I know, I should have done this on a couple different slides. That's fine. You all know this one already, so it doesn't matter, right? Pre-contemplation, I'm just gonna go through this real quick. It goes through the characteristics of it and then some of the techniques that you can use based on the stage. So, pre-contemplation, those are the people who are in denial. They don't have a problem. They're not currently considering change. Ignorance is bliss. So techniques, validate the lack of readiness. Clarify, the decision is yours. Encourage reevaluation of current behavior. So you want to do that gently. You don't want to come across forceful, like you need to think about this behavior or anything, but kind of softly do that. Encourage self-exploration, not action. You're not asking them to do anything or to make any change. They're clearly not ready for that yet. And to explain and personalize the risk that you see. Like, this is what I see in it. Okay, contemplation. They're ambivalent about change. They're sitting on the fence, right? I don't know, I might make a change. They're definitely not considering change within the next month, though. It's not that present for them. Techniques are things like validating lack of readiness, clarifying the decision is theirs, encouraging evaluation of the pros and cons on both sides, identifying and promoting new positive outcome expectations. So what that means is what could you look forward to if you made this change or if you went forward with it? What can you expect that might happen? Third stage, preparation. They are kind of testing the waters. They're planning to act within the next month. They're kind of ready to make that change. You can help them by identifying and assisting in problem solving about obstacles that are in place, obstacles to them getting started on this. Help patient identify social support, so who's going to be in their network. And you definitely want to assess that they have the skills in place to actually make the change. You don't want to set them up for failure. And then encourage small initial steps. We're not going to jump in all the way when we're in that pre-contemplation, but you can begin to make some of those small steps. Action phase, this is when they're actually practicing the behavior. 3 to 6 months into that. This is when you're going to focus on restructuring the cues. Maybe you run into some problems with some of the cues. You're going to look at what cues are in place for them to do that. So restructuring those. Maybe you need to make some modifications to their social support or add some social support in. You can do that. bolster self-efficacy. I like this, it's tying in everything that we talked about, right? For dealing with the obstacles. So they've had an obstacle come up using some of those techniques that we talked about to help them believe in themselves that they can overcome those. And then combat feelings of loss. I wouldn't even say necessarily combat feelings of loss, because I think it's important for people to allow themselves to feel the loss and experience that, but also have the other side of it, to reiterate the long-term benefits. Look at where you are now. Look at what your goal is. Maintenance stage, this is when they're continuing their commitment, they've been following through on it. It's about 6 months to 5 years of doing this new behavior. You want to have a kind of a relapse prevention plan in place, right? That follow-up support, reinforcing the internal rewards, so those intrinsic rewards that they're now developing, and discuss coping with relapse. That in the relapse phase, they're going back to their old behaviors, so they've had a relapse. It's not the end of the world. You can get back on track. Evaluate the trigger, look at what happened, how did you get to this place, right? Maybe a relapse autopsy. You can find those online. They're great if you haven't used them. And reassess motivation and barriers for plan stronger coping strategies. You know, maybe you're doing some additional work that they hadn't fully resolved in the past. Maybe they need some additional trauma work or something that really hasn't been addressed that has contributed to this relapse. You can get this whole chart. I don't know if you can see that on yours, but that's the link to it. This is just copied and pasted from it. This isn't my own, so I just want to, you can access this. I thought it was a helpful chart just to keep in mind. All right, so looking at those stages of change, where do you think Christina was? I'll go back to the one that you can actually. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action. Where is she?
Maintaining negative behavior.
So what would that be maintenance? Maintenance of negative?
Not in a positive
Where is she?
way.
So where is she in terms of implementing the new behavior?
Contemplation, because she came to the doctor's appointment. She's motivated, but
I say it's pretty.
Free, so she's in denial of a problem?
I still don't think she recognizes the gravity of it.
She stated her goals, right? She stated her goals, she wants to, I would put her more in contemplation.
You put her at contemplation?
and you said she sought this out, so there's some.
She did
Some part of her, I
seek
guess,
this
that would
out.
say that.
Maybe she's tried to make small changes here and there, you know.
Well, she thinks so. She only had 3 pieces instead of the whole pizza.
Right.
So.
Even though it's distorted, she's trying to make some,
That was a large
Some French
assumption.
fries instead of all French. She finished her fries.
Okay.
She's testing the
finished the
water,
fries.
so yeah, preparation. I'll leave to me at least.
Yeah. So testing the waters.
That's the best way to put it, she's testing it.
I just,
That's the progress.
She went to the doctor's appointment. She's going to these doctor's
Okay,
appointments.
okay.
She's
Yeah, there's a goal.
identified, so I think she's not in complete denial. She knows that a problem exists with her weight. And so I would probably put her at contemplation. You know, after this, the clip that we saw, she did start to make better changes. So she was probably in preparation and maybe action at that point. But really the takeaway message is to try to meet your client where they are with this. Obviously, if we were relapse planning with someone in pre-contemplation, that's not going to work, right?
The doctor took over the situation. I'm just asking. He went from whatever we're discussing to his own plan of action.
He did.
I mean, he removed all, and he probably was closer to relapse prevention than anything else. Because he inpatient, boom, and he removed the problem, I guess.
Yes.
Again,
This rolls into motivational interviewing, which a lot of those techniques that we talked about were from. Do you all have any experience with motivational interviewing? I'm not going to go very far into it, but this is just a little bit of background of kind of what guides this type of therapy. It's a goal-oriented, client-centered counseling style for eliciting behavior change and helping clients resolve ambivalence around change. 5 minutes. You need a break?
Yes.
I'm like, what does that mean? All right, why don't we let's take a 5-minute break. Thank you. So I was talking about motivational interviewing. If that's new to you. A couple of things that I just want to point out here. I don't want to go over all of this, but are these 4 guiding principles? Resist the writing reflex. This can be a really difficult one for really anyone who goes into this profession wanting to help. We want to set paths straight. We want to help people meet their goals. But we really have to kind of fight that reflex. If you take, for an example, a problem drinker, they know the consequences that they've had, right? They know that they have a DUI. They know that their marriage is failing, whatever it is. But they also like drinking, and they don't want to see themselves as having a problem. So if you say to them, I think you have a problem, you should quit. What are they going to do?
Quit seeing you.
Yes.
Shut down or shut down.
Yes, defensive, shut down. It's not that bad. Defend. It's not bad, I'm fine. And you know what? The problem is that we tend to believe what we hear ourselves say out loud. So if you're fighting with them over this and they're saying, no, I'm fine, there's no problem, their denial is just getting thicker. So that's one of the guiding principles. Also understanding your patient's motivation. So what's unique to them that they're wanting to make this change? Listening, if you all have good listening skills, if you're in this field, right? And also to empower the patient, which we've been talking about. Explore how they can make a difference in their own health, how you can give them some of the control, like you mentioned earlier. These are 2 books that I really love. The first one is not just for mental health professionals. If you work with physicians or nursing staff or anyone really in the medical field, it's written for all sorts of professionals to be able to understand how to use motivational techniques in working with a client or a patient. So that's a really good one that I like. And then this is a workbook that helped me when I was starting to learn some of these skills, and I look back on it occasionally, but it's a workbook for the therapist to be able to learn motivational interviewing skills. So I had the first edition, so I haven't seen the second edition actually. There are formal ways to measure stage of change too. Oftentimes you can just kind of figure that out and don't necessarily need a full assessment. But here's a Eureka. And there's a puppy. See, I told you my bias. That's another goal.
That tongue adds it all.
We're going to skip this video for the sake of time. It's okay. If we have time, we can come back. It's not too special. Let me make sure. Yeah, I want to skip that. That just basically summarizes all the different areas that we talked about. It's if we have time. Okay, willpower. So I originally didn't have this included in the presentation. I got to thinking about it. This has a lot to do with helping someone to adhere to a behavioral change, right? Willpower. And APA, American Psychological Association, put out a good brief reading. You can access online for free on willpower. I can get you the full name of it. I'm not remembering it right now. But it's it's a handout or an article on willpower, and all summarizes like all the current research in the area to kind of help you understand and make sense of willpower and how to apply that. The APA.org, and you go to the Help Center, and then you just look for willpower. There's a whole PDF on it. But it simplifies it, helps you understand and look at some of the research. But what we do know is willpower is the ability to resist short-term gratification to achieve a long-term goal. And there are a lot of benefits to that. research has found that willpower is correlated with positive life outcomes. People do better who show willpower at a younger age, and it's pretty consistent over time too. So, do you remember the marshmallow experiment? Michelle, is that how you say it? Where they took, I think it was like preschoolers or young kids, and they had a pile of marshmallows, and they said, you know, when I come back into the room, you will get 2 marshmallows. But if you can't wait while I'm gone, I'm outside of this room, just press this button and I'll come back in and you can have 1 marshmallow. So they're trying to measure the delayed gratification in the kids, so basically their willpower. Can they wait so they get those 2 marshmallows, or do they have to have the 1 marshmallow right now? They actually did a follow-up study on these. They found all those participants that did that. And they saw those same kids that struggled with that willpower or struggled with delayed gratification still had some of the same struggles as adults, still were kind of in the same area. But you can, they say you can strengthen willpower. It's like a muscle. A lot of it, I guess, is formed in childhood and whatnot, but you can strengthen it. So you do tasks to strengthen, just like you would when you're working out. It's muscle memory. That hot and cool system, basically the hot is like our emotional response. The cool is like our cognitive processes that help us delay gratification. So there are all these treats out there, right? Some of you weren't really hungry and we're like, oh, you know, maybe I shouldn't. I'm gonna have lunch here in the next hour, right? So that's your cool system going and saying I'm gonna stay away from it. When you've been using that over and over again, that willpower, then your hot system can sometimes override that. No, I want it now. I'm gonna have it. So, like the problem with reading, you know, and getting to bed, it's like you've just done all of that hard work. You know, you've worked all day, and you've worked some into the evening. You've done some things that aren't so fun, some things that are okay. And then you get to the point where it says, okay, it's time to get in bed. Well, you're like, no, I want to do something now that I enjoy. Well, that's that hot system, that more emotional, I'm going to do that, or I'm going to take that cookie, I'm going to eat it, who cares? Even though it's not in alliance with what your goals are. Willpower depletion is such a thing as well. We talked about comparing willpower to a muscle. So it becomes fatigued with overuse. Studies show that repeatedly resisting temptation drains the ability to withstand future enticements. So if we've resisted all day at work, and then, you know, there's a plate of warm cookies when we get home, it's going to be hard to resist those. And willpower depletion also has a physical basis. So this is important. This is something that I think you can take and help your clients with too, because there is lower blood glucose levels when your willpower is depleted. So if you have like consistent small meals throughout the day, or you maintain your blood sugar level, then that can help with some of those temptations. And also, willpower depletion can impact like a variety of behaviors. It's not just one. One thing that we see with it is like, I've been talking about food, so the cookies, but also substance use and abuse. If someone is willpower depleted, more likely to, you know, go into that relapse. So really planning with your patient or client or Christina, okay, what are the difficult parts of your day? Where, you know, when have you used a lot of your willpower up, and how is that going to affect you come 4 p.m.? And what can we put in place to help you there? So if you can look at those subtle patterns for yourself and for your client on willpower, it can help you become more adherent. So do y'all have any thoughts about willpower, or how you might use this concept to help you out?
I kind of thought about, I have a lot of willpower, I don't have any want power.
You don't have any want power. Your willpower is not the want power. You got to have the desire to change it first, or to do something different. Yeah. So willpower is still there.
I have a question about blood glucose.
Mhm.
So, just so I make sure I understand, like, as far as the willpower, so blood glucose is attached to willpower for a number of different things, not just food control, but also like all the other stuff. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure I heard that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So everybody can benefit from maintaining their.
Yeah, if your body is crashing, just
Yeah.
physically crashing, it's hard for you to see any
Yeah.
kind of other, I mean, even your mood starts to crash as well.
Self-care.
Yeah.
And so you may not reach for food, even though your glucose levels are low. You might do one of the other behaviors you're trying to stay away from, like taking a drink
And
or.
then it needs doing that behavior
Yeah.
is low because of
Yes.
feelings inside.
And I'm trying to find, I have the specific studies on that too, but they're also included in that APA article, which I found that fascinating. There's some more diversity. Okay. We're not gonna watch this one either, I'm sorry. It's okay, it wasn't that good.
We touched it.
All right, educational strategies, they don't really work. They don't. Why do you think giving someone education on their behavior is not going to help them become more adherent?
Is there set in their ways?
They're set in their ways?
Yeah, and they determine that they don't want to change. You can present to them all the information that, that would motivate them, but they're not going to even make any changes because they've already made up their mind they're okay with change.
Yeah.
They're set in their ways.
I see that more as like a cheerleader, like that, but not really giving them tools. You know, like it's, when you think of examples, I think of all like the YouTube videos and those big, and you get all fired up, but it really doesn't give you the tools on how to change it,
Get it, fire windows.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
these often use like emotionally evoking strategies to frighten someone into being adherent, which, may make an initial shift, but it's not going to stick to it. This is not to say that information's not important, because it is, but that isn't the only thing, that's not the only intervention that you're using. And they're not effective because people don't resist change because they don't know better. They typically know better, like know that this isn't very healthy for me, and this is maybe not what I should be doing. So just giving them more information isn't going to help with that. The DARE model kind of fell into this. It wasn't too effective.
I think too, like, people don't think it's gonna happen to them. Like, we know all this stuff and working on substance abuse, like, well, I know all these people have overdosed, but it's not gonna happen to me. So like it's kind of that terminal uniqueness.
That's not me. That applies to someone else.
Right.
I remember from my elementary school there was a picture of smokers' lungs hanging in the hallway. Did anyone else see that poster? And I smoked briefly in college, so it didn't. It scared me as a child, but it didn't do much. Thankfully, I quit that habit. But so you can see those things there, but it just kind of scares you. It doesn't do much. But there are some ways, like you're pointing out, that you can tailor educational interventions to make them more personal and to make them more effective. And one of the ways is to make it apply to that particular person. So how you're presenting it, make it tangible for that person. Not just giving them information, but talking to them in a personal way, making it apply to them. In this video, one of the things that she talks about is, the people who go through and they look for like gaps in the windows of your house to see how energy efficient your house is. Yeah, they're doing those inspections. And they weren't getting a lot of follow through on the recommendations based on their inspections when, there were some leaks and such, but when they made it tangible, when they said, in your house, you have the hole the size of a basketball when you add it all up. People were more likely to make change because then they can kind of understand, wow, if there's a hole the size of a basketball in my house, I want to seal the windows, I want to take care of that type of thing. Right. Okay. All right, we just have a couple minutes. I'm going to hit the highlights of this. One thing I want to be sure to talk about here is diversity, culture, and tailoring your plan based on that patient's needs. Because if you're not taking culture into account, you're probably just going to miss the mark completely. It can really affect adherence. Some cultures are more likely to be adherent to your recommendation. Older Japanese males are more likely because, generally, because of kind of this respect for physicians' advice or medical providers' advice, this kind of trust in community. But then you also have to think about cultures with a mistrust in systems, who have been really hurt by systems in the past. You have to think about personal factors of SES, of financial resources. Do they actually have the means? Do they have insurance? Maybe that's stopping them from doing this behavior. Are they able to actually follow through on what's in their best or in their behavior change? And that's where I love where the social workers come into this room, because they really help and find, all those resources, help connect people to make these things a possibility. I wanted to say that before we ran out of time. There's more on that too, but some of the other factors that affect adherence are cognitive factors, so health literacy. And that's just the degree to which individuals have the capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information. And I want to find the stat on this, but patients recall as little as 50% of what was discussed during a typical medical encounter. And misunderstandings of written medical instructions can be, really high. 42% of people misunderstood directions for taking medications on an empty stomach. 25% misunderstood the scheduling of their next appointment. 60% were unable to read and understand typical informed consent document. So, sometimes we just assume, or at least I have in the past just assumed, they're following along with what I'm saying. We're on the same page, or they know what they're reading and they understand it. But it's our job to be able to communicate effectively, to check in, to make sure that they're really understanding and follow up about that. An ability to remember the details. If you think about your own interaction with a physician, it's hard to remember all that was discussed. So patient involvement is super important. We've been talking about patient agreement on what the plan of action should be. You want to make sure that they are an important part of making those decisions. It's not just you putting that out there. And these factors predict adherence. So it's not how severe the disease is actually, it's the patient's perception of how severe the problem is. They could have the most terminal cancer in the world and not think that it's a big deal and not be adherent, or vice versa. It could be something very minor, but they really feel like it's a severe issue, and so they take care of it. The complexity of the treatment also predicts adherence. So if you think about taking a medication, there's a high adherence rate. If you're taking one medication a day or 2 medications a day, it drops a little bit with 3 a day. With 4 a day, it goes way down. Why? Because there's a cue for 2 a day, AM, PM, 3 times a day, lunch, or breakfast, lunch, dinner. But we see if the more complex we make something, the less likely you're going to follow through with it. So break it down into those simple steps when you can. Okay. Yeah, just an example. I want to let you all watch Christina's update. And then we'll just leave you with your thoughts around that because we're out of time. But I hope that you will think a little bit more about your own behavior. Here it goes.
It's been 2 years since I had my surgery, and I would have never imagined life could be so great. I've gained a whole new independence, and I finally moved out from my family's house. They had to do everything for me.
I had to have help getting dressed, or getting up out of bed, being put in bed.
And it's been a year since I finalized the divorce with my ex-husband. Our relationship centered on him enabling me.
I'm enablers very well.
But now I can focus more on getting healthy. I've lost a lot of weight in the last year, mostly because I'm really careful about what I eat. But when I look in the mirror, I see excess skin, flabby arms, and I see myself still as a big person. It's hard to let it all sink in how much has changed. I'm currently living with my boyfriend Shane. He moved in about a month ago.
It's a new boyfriend.
Hey.
You wanna jump in?
Yeah. Shane and I have been friends for 8 years. He knew me at my biggest, and was also really supportive of me. That's Shane. After dating for a while, things got serious, and I asked him to move in with me.
We've gotten to know each other on a really deep level. We just open up to each other, and we'll finish each other's sentences sometimes. Like, I'll be thinking of something, like a song or something, and she'll start singing it. I mean, it's just crazy.
You look up some places, and I'll go get ready. Shane's really good for me. He helps me get out of the house. Even though I feel insecure about how I look, I still feel like I need to hide my arms and my legs when I go out. It's weird because before, when I was 700 pounds, I couldn't even get out of the house. And now that I can, I still don't feel normal. But Dr. Now has approved me for skin surgery on my arms, so I'm really hoping that helps me finally be happy with how I look. It's really hard for me to be present when I'm out in public because I'm so distracted with the way my body looks. I'm hoping that once the surgery's out of the way and I feel better about my body, it'll help me be more comfortable with our relationship.
All right, ma'am, you're gonna have our fancier chicken.
Shane is great, but it's just so hard to believe that he wants to be with me, even with the ugly body I still have.
So that's it. To me, that highlights and demonstrates that adherence is just part of the puzzle, right? We're dealing with the whole person here, and the underlying psychological difficulties need to be addressed concurrently. But I really hope that you can use some of what we talked about today, your little treatment form, and alter your own treatment plans based on some of these techniques, or use some of those strategies. So that is it. Thank you. Let me know if you have any questions. Yes.
Just to me, the ending of this, my question is, should there have been some counseling before she had the surgery?
Yes. Yes, I used to do bariatric evaluations, and where I did them, that was, you went through a whole evaluation process first and determined if you needed additional support, what type of support you needed. You had to clear that before even getting that. They don't show that on this. They do talk about that she's now in therapy, and she's working on some of this, but I definitely think so that there were those indicators for her that she needed some additional support. So I think for her case, she definitely would have benefited from that. I took you up to the last minute, so you all are free to go. And if you have questions, I'm sticking around to